Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining in. We'll start in a few minutes. We'll just let other participants join in the meanwhile. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who has joined in today. I'm Pratibha Kela. I am the Senior Project Officer at ICLEI South Asia, based out of New Delhi, and also part of the ALP Secretariat. So this is the second session for today in the second week of the ALP Forum. Earlier today, we had a very informative session on how countries in the region have been using their actions to recover from the COVID pandemic as an opportunity for green growth and recovery as part of their long-term emission strategies as well. Taking this forward, this afternoon, we'll focus more on the commitments that countries are expected to declare to ensure that we remain within the 1.5 degree temperature rise and not move beyond that. I would just like to state that the session will be recorded today. I hope there will be no objection to that and everyone has given their consent. I would just go over a few housekeeping rules before I hand it over to the moderator. So today's session, I would just request everybody to please put your mobile phones and other online messaging apps on silent, as it is creates a little bit of a disturbance for other participants, and to also keep your concentration on this forum. The session will be in English. However, we do also have interpreters here in Bahasa, Indonesia, as well as in Mandarin. Participants are encouraged to send their questions in the Q&A box, which you can see below on your screen. And those participants who are joining in from Huva will also see this on their screen. So please, I encourage you to put in your questions there and to ensure that this is a very interactive and lively session. If you do have a question that you would personally like to ask the speaker, you can just raise your hand and my team will unmute you so that you can ask the question during the question and answer session. From the speakers can, of course, we would encourage you to keep your videos on while you're speaking. However, if there's a bandwidth issue, you may turn it off at any point of time. So I hope people have been comfortable with the Whova and the Zoom platform, and we look forward to an interactive session. Moving on, I would just like to introduce our moderator for today. We have Ms. Diana Quesada, who is, so she is the Green Recovery Lead at Global Green Growth Institute at the Climate Action and Inclusive Development Unit based out of Seoul, South Korea. Diana is responsible for leading the research and analysis activities on green recovery, as well as providing technical inputs for green recovery bankable projects. She has a certified English climate finance specialist by the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management, and also holds a master's degree in climate change management finance from Imperial College London. So the session today will have a flow of the speakers giving their interventions on various aspects of the NDCs and aligning them to the long-term emission strategies. We know that the long-term emission strategies provide a long-term perspective to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement towards a low carbon development pathway. And the NDCs are, however, short-term and more concrete milestones towards meeting these long-term emission strategies. And aligning these two documents will give an opportunity for better defining and prioritizing the climate actions for each of the countries. So we look forward to this session, and I would now like to hand it over to Diana to take the session forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caleb. So good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. So just to introduce a little bit of what we are going to discuss and present today, we are all aware that there is a substantial gap between short and medium-term mitigation targets included in the country's NDCs and the reductions in global GHG emissions that are needed to achieve the long-term temperature goal in the Paris Agreement. Thus, it is imperative that we align the NDCs and the long-term strategies. So countries are starting to be aware that long-term climate strategies represent an opportunity for countries to identify and set a long-term vision to achieve targets and to define roadmaps for deep economy-wide transformations needed to achieve low carbon development. And these long-term strategies will not only allow them to achieve climate objectives, but also to achieve other socioeconomic development objectives established in the SDGs. Countries are starting to realize also that aligning NDCs with the long-term mitigation strategies can ensure an effective use of their resources. And this is because when you better align your policies with long-term strategies, basically you guide the identification of priorities and you guide the implementation of policies, the allocation of investments, and the development of project pipelines. Moreover, with the current health and economic crisis derived from COVID-19 pandemic, countries have seen the importance of aligning the NDCs and LEDS to ensure a more effective climate and socioeconomic policy making, more efficient use of financial resources overall. And they realize that they can pursue mitigation objectives as well as social objectives. Even more, multiple countries are now putting forward their commitments to reach net zero carbon and net zero GHG emissions by mid-century or sooner. So these long-term strategies will allow them to basically put forward their new NDCs and have them as a baseline. So today we will hear practical examples on how to better align long-term strategies with NDCs and how to improve the capacity of the governments to better understand how long-term strategies can work in their favor. So today we have 5 experts and practitioners. Our first speaker is Mr. Jens Radczynski. He is the lead of UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for Asia Pacific. He has an extensive knowledge in the fields of climate finance, carbon markets, and carbon pricing. And he has supported multiple projects in the Asia Pacific region regarding the NDC support and global climate action, MRV and transparency, and CDM. So I will give the floor to Mr. Jens. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana, for giving me the floor. And warm welcome to all participants of this plenary session. I'd also really like to thank the organizers of this forum. It's a really timely and important event, and I'm very happy to be presenting here on behalf of the RCC Bangkok. Yeah, I would like to start maybe to introduce the RCC a little bit and to introduce our work. You will see that we have a very extensive work plan. A lot of our work streams are related to NDC support to countries, and more, of course, these are also influenced by thinking on about long-term strategies and low-emission development strategies. So can I have the first slide, please? Thank you. So the RCC Bangkok, it's a regional collaboration center of the UNFCCC and IGS. So UNFCCC, as you probably are all aware, is based, the headquarters in Bonn, and that's where most of my colleagues are working. But we started a couple of years back to open this regional collaboration center together with host agencies. We have a network of 6 of these centers in different parts of the world, and the one in Bangkok is working and serving the Asia Pacific region. Our background is on the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism of the under the Kyoto Protocol, and that's really where all our early years activities were. Since 2015, since the Paris Agreement, the scope of work has really grown quite a bit, and focus is really now supporting countries in the regions in their implementation of their NDCs. We still have a focus on markets and mechanisms due to the background of in CDM. Next slide, please. Yeah, just to give you a quick overview of our region, it's really from all the RCCs, the regional centers, the largest geographical coverage, all the way from Central Asia into the Pacific. Next slide, please. And yeah, the RCCs, other than maybe UN country offices, we're not the country office, it's a regional collaboration center, as I mentioned, together with the local partners. So we're combining the knowledge of the local partners with the global network of the UNFCCC and the other RCCs. We are really, since we are a very small office, relying on a strong regional networks and work closely with partners in the region, including NGOs, financial institutions, and also very much with our colleagues from other UN agencies. Next slide, please. Yeah, a little bit also of the background. We are working closely with our colleagues in Bonn, obviously. So the UNFCCC has launched the initial synthesis report of NDC submissions received last year, and has issued this report to show you where we are standing as kind of a stock taking of new NDCs, which shows that from the 75 countries that had submitted new and updated NDCs in 2020, that emission by 2030 will only be 0.5% lower than in 2010, which is really very far away from what we need, what science tells us, what we need to reach the 1.5 degrees temperature goal. Emissions should decrease by almost 45%. So there is a huge gap, and we are preparing an updated NDC synthesis report with submissions that received the Secretariat by the end of July. Hopefully that will improve the picture a little bit, but nevertheless, it's obvious that the NDC submissions are still far away from the temperature goals. And that also shows us how important it is to actually have a long-term vision. If we just go by NDC submissions step by step without having the overall picture, without having the long-term vision on where we need to be in 2050, the improvements from one NDC submission round to the next may simply be too small. So more and more these long-term emission reduction strategies move in the focus of our work, and all the work we're doing on NDCs and supporting countries more and more really gets a focus on the long-term temperature goal and the net emission zero by the mid-century. Now, next slide, please. Yeah. I think you're probably aware of this. So last year we had announcements in Asia from China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea to announce their mid-century net zero emission goal. And we have, and sorry, 2 countries are missing from Asia, so far received 6 LEDs from the Republic of Korea, Indonesia, Republic of Marshall Islands, Fiji, and I'm so sorry, Japan and Singapore is missing on this slide, but we'll correct it if we share the slides after the event. Next slide, please. Now I want to show you some of the areas of work. Just an overview: NDC and LEDs, climate finance, very much moving into the focus, carbon pricing, market mechanism, and very important also non-party stakeholder engagement. I would like to give you a couple of examples. Next slide, please. Yeah, the work on NDCs and LEDs very much aligned with what our colleagues are doing in Bonn. The RCC is kind of the eyes and ears in the region, so we are gathering information and intelligence from what countries are preparing, and it's a two-road information, a two-direction information flow. So we receive information from countries in the region, but we also, of course, been able to facilitate some feedback from colleagues in Bonn where it's needed. We work very closely with colleagues on MRVs, so transparency issues, especially transition to the enhanced transparency framework under the Paris Agreement. And also, as I mentioned, with our colleagues from other UN agencies, especially in the so-called issue-based coalitions, we work very closely on NDC support for countries. And one of our more also long-term work streams on coal phase out, I'd say, very much linked to long-term strategies. It helps, of course, very much to convince countries that if the 2050 temperature goal, 2050 emission goal is clear, then we cannot lock in on coal phase out. There are still coal pipelines in the region that cannot be implemented. So with a vision to the long-term temperature goal and the mid-century emission goals, it's of course our advocacy in the region for coal phase out becomes much more weight. Next slide, please. Needs-based finance, that's a work stream where we support certain countries and groups of countries in the region really to formulate climate finance access strategies, to set their priorities in line with their NDCs and long-term strategies, where they have priorities, and we facilitate investor contacts, we facilitate through investor forums the support of these regional priorities. Next slide, please. The work on carbon pricing market mechanism, also a very important element to support countries in their NDC implementation. Carbon pricing can of course also set a very important signal for private sector, for the economy in a country, not to lock in high emission technologies. So again, we are supporting groups of countries in the region together with colleagues from other agencies on carbon pricing and carbon market mechanisms. Next slide, please. And then finally, also becoming more and more an important area of work, the engagement of non-party stakeholders. We've been pretty active here because it's obvious, and we've been talking about it for quite some time, how important it is to engage private sector and non-party stakeholder in climate action and emission goals. So it's again a two-way road. We need the governments to set the right policies, but we also need signals from non-party stakeholder to the government, say, yes, we are ready, we understand where we're heading to, and we are coming on board. So we have also been supporting very recently the Climate Champions Race to Zero campaign. It's more and more engagements with non-party stakeholder and businesses to make them understand not only what is the NDC of the country, but what is really the long-term direction. And I'd say business and non-party stakeholder really are engaging more and more and understanding the direction. Next slide, please. Just a couple of recent activities. I mentioned Race to Zero. We started in Thailand here with the network of UN agencies, with the regional residence coordinators office and the Global Compact Network. And we are planning to extend this work to really engage these networks in other countries in our region. I'd say that's it for this slide. Next slide, please. I think, I've reached the end. So I try to give you a little bit of an overview on what the RCC is, what we are doing, our work stream, and I'm looking very much forward then to question and answer session where I'd be happy to really answer more specific question on the alignment of NDCs and LEDS. I'd say we stand very much in the beginning of this work. There was a lot of focus on NDCs, especially in 2020 and also this year with the updated and revised and new NDCs. More and more, as I mentioned, the work also on LEDS is moving into the focus, and the link between these two tools is becoming much stronger. Thank you very much, and with this, back to you, Diana.
Thank you, Mr. Jens. So I will welcome all the participants to write any questions you have under the Q&A section or in the chat of this session. Our next speaker is Dr. Estelios Grafakos. He is Principal Economist at Global Green Growth Institute. He leads the technical work in developing the LEDS across all GGI member countries. Stelios has led numerous research and policy advisory papers and projects supporting local and national governments in low and middle income countries to develop their low carbon and climate resilient strategies. I will give the floor now to Dr. Grafakos for his presentation.
Many thanks, Diana, for the introduction. Let me share my screen. I'm not sure.
Would you like us to show your slides, and maybe you can access through remote control?
Excuse me?
Would you like us to share your slides?
Yeah, it seems that, yeah, there are some settings, so that will be fine. Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, so can the organizers please share the slides and we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting session, aligning the NDCs and long-term low emission development strategies. I'm going to talk to you briefly about aligning the LEDs with NDCs and national development priorities experiences from GGI, and present you briefly some principles for alignment of LEDs NDCs with the national development priorities. The next slide, please. So the outline is as follows. I will briefly present you the work that GGI is doing on supporting its member countries to develop their LEDs. Then I will briefly touch upon the issue of alignment of LEDs with the Paris Agreement, NDCs and national development priorities by illustrating this from examples from Fiji and Tonga LEDs. Then I will briefly present some principles of alignment. And lastly, I will briefly present you a couple of resources that the participants could access. So what you see here is the map of GGI's countries. GGI supported the government of Fiji in 2018 to develop its LEDs and submit to the UNFCCC. Also, currently, we provide support to the Tongan government to develop its LEDs. The work will be finalized before COP26, and the submission to UNFCCC is expected then. In addition to that, GGI supporting other countries in other regions. Recently, in spring of 2021, actually, we completed also the support to the Hungarian government to develop their long-term strategy, which was approved by the government and is expected to be submitted also to the UNFCCC. We just started the work of supporting the governments of Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, funded by AFD to develop their long-term low emission development strategies. Furthermore, in Vanuatu, with funding from New Zealand, we started also supporting the government to develop its LEDs, and another country in the Pacific, Solomon Islands, we just initiated the preparatory phase. This is funded by GIZ in the Pacific and DC Hub. Furthermore, in Asia, GGI is supporting the government of Cambodia in a collaborative setup focusing on the waste sector, where other implementing partners support the low emission development pathways in other sectors. We have also got funding from GCF for Myanmar LEDS at the sub-national level. However, due to the political turmoil, this has been paused for now. So you see that's a range of countries that we support on LEDS. I have to say also that GGI is supporting a large number of NDC, and the intersection of LDC and NDC and LEDS is very important to exploit the opportunities of alignment of those two processes that both are also part of the Paris Agreement. So the LEDS could provide a necessary direction for continuous enhancement of the NDCs through the process of regular revision cycles of the NDCs, and can really reinforce more actionable, achievable, and ambitious NDCs, really to lead towards a low carbon development pathway. In addition to that, the LEDS and NDCs are highly connected through shared analytical components. So MRVs, sectoral modeling, socioeconomic assessment, those are assessment methods and tools that can be utilized both in LEDS and NDCs. So depending on which process has been started first, so those could be also an easy practical links between the two processes. If yes, yeah. So the LEDS could really steer the regular NDC submission, as we can see, and could lead eventually by mid-century to carbon neutrality. So in GGI, if we can see the next slide, we do have some examples where we exploited those potential synergies, and I will just briefly touch upon two examples from Fiji and Tonga here. The Fiji NDC in 2015 and the NDC roadmap in 2017 provided really the main basis for the BAU unconditional and BAU conditional scenarios of the LEDS. In addition to that, the high ambition and very high ambition scenarios of the LEDS were based on these baseline data and BAU scenarios. All these coming initially from the NDC and the NDC roadmap. Furthermore, Fiji has just submitted the enhanced NDC, which also reiterates the same energy targets aligned with the LEDS. So we see a continuous reinforcement of NDC revision cycles and the LEDS development in Fiji, which is a great example of alignment of those two processes. Just to add here that in Fiji is expected the climate neutrality target to be introduced also in climate bill. So that shows the strong commitment of the government to support the Paris Agreement. In the case of Tonga, again, we have a full alignment of those two processes as they started in parallel. And the NDC revision was in essence part of the LEDS process, and all or most of NDC targets in different sectors and their actions to achieve these targets have been included and flagged as NDC targets and actions in the LEDS for targets and actions up to 2030. And building on those, further to 2050, the LEDS is being developed. Tonga has submitted its revised NDC already at the end of 2020 and is expected, as mentioned before, to submit its LEDS before COP26. Apart from the alignment of LEDS with NDCs, it's important also to align with national development plans. LEDS is a low-emission development strategy. So development should be at the heart of the LEDS. Therefore, any alignment of national development plans should be at the forefront of the LEDS. An example of aligning the LEDS with the national development plans, again, is the case of Fiji, which is quite a comprehensive process and document. The National Development Plan formed the foundation for the socioeconomic targets for Fiji, which were embedded and incorporated partly in the Fiji LEDS. So in addition to that, some of the NDP targets were also related to climate-related issues like cutting emissions, but also on achieving 100% renewable energy by 2036. An important factor for that was that both processes were developed by the same ministry, the Ministry of Economy, although by different divisions, but that was one of the, let's say, success factors of a full alignment of the National Development Plan and LEDS. And of course, the Ministry of Economy was from the very beginning till the end of the process involved and guiding the whole process, so ensuring ownership of those two processes and full alignment. Next slide, please. So here we highlight some principles for developing an LEDS. Country ownership is very essential. As mentioned before, with the example from Fiji, leadership and guidance from the host country government is essential. And of course, engaging very actively and closely with local experts and institutions is also essential for the success of the LEDS process. A sound analytical approach is also essential. I mentioned before that those analytical methods and tools, scenario analysis, sectoral modeling, macroeconomic modeling, GGI utilizes the green economy model, also capturing uncertainty. All those are elements that can be utilized both in an LEDS process and NDC. So here we have clear synergies on utilizing those tools and methods. Integrated approach, again, we're talking about alignment of NDCs and LEDS and also with other development priorities. So an integrated approach could drive alignment of LEDS with development priorities, including adaptation. So another important aspect for low-income countries, SEEDs, adaptation should be part of the LEDS, although the main entry point is mitigation. Still, adaptation could be seen as a development objective, so should be also incorporated in the process. Along with climate and carbon finance, that also cross-cutting issue, cross-cutting in terms of the processes of LEDS and NDCs. So again, we see clear synergies there when developing climate and carbon finance plan for implementation of actions. Identifying, collaborating with the strategic partners, international sector-specific technical experts and national experts. Again, this technical type of work and strategic partnerships are essential for a successful NDC revision, but also LEDS development and alignment of the two. Lastly, inclusion of assessment of co-benefits that would reflect development priorities is also an important principle to be incorporated both in LEDs and NDCs, including co-benefits around adaptation objectives, but also around SDGs. So, and I would like to close with a couple of resources from GGI that are available to the participants. We developed a brochure with GGI services on supporting the development of LEDs. And also you can access in the UNFCCC website the LEDs document of Fiji, quite a comprehensive document where, as mentioned before, illustrates the alignment of LEDs with development priorities. Yeah, I would like to acknowledge the contribution of a few colleagues working in the Pacific, in Fiji and Tonga, for providing inputs to this presentation. Thank you very much. There is, yeah, thank you very much for your attention and participation. I'm happy to discuss any questions you may have. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Grafakos. So we are hearing next from Professor Jayashree Roy. She is a chair professor from the Asian Institute of Technology. She has participated in the IPCC 2007 Nobel Peace Prize winning panel and is continuing her contribution as coordinating lead author of the 6th assessment cycle of the Work Group 3 of the IPCC. She has developed extensive research and papers in the areas of economics of pollution and climate change, modeling energy demand, and economy-wide modeling exercise for deriving policy implications. She is a lead chapter author of the Global Energy Assessment and has been associated with the Stern Review Report and many other global and national sustainable reports. The floor is yours, Professor Roy.
Thank you very much, Diana. And thank you, the organizers, for inviting me to speak on this occasion. What I would like to say is that, it is true that we need to be aware of the critical junctions to our journey of not exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial level by the turn of this century. We wrote in one of our recent reports that 2021 to 2030 is a decisive decade in this century-long journey. We need to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by the end of 2030, while drawing down massive amounts of CO2 already in the atmosphere. And this cannot happen only by one or two countries' effort, but it has to happen everywhere. Science is now clear that actions up to 2020 has fallen far short of the magnitude needed to be consistent with the temperature target set in the Paris Agreement. So technologically, rapid transitions are possible, but only with clear goals, commitments, and ambition from national and local government, businesses, investors, civil society, and citizens. But what we felt is in our more recent studies is that the countries are falling short. Most of the countries are falling short in capacity of implementation. So it's not that it's not known what is to be done, but the capacity for implementation is a major gap that we really need to recognize and understand. And also it is now clear that in the game-changing solution from the supply side are going to be zero carbon electricity and green hydrogen. And I don't think in this region there is at the national level and at the business level, and at the bottom-up level, these discussions are there at the implementation level. So we are far away from those, all our studies are showing. And we all know that we must end construction of new coal power plants and close one plant a day between now and 2040 at least, so that clean energy becomes the dominant energy source. I mean, these are all known facts, right? We also know that to achieve zero carbon transport, shift to electric, green, and hydrogen-based mobility on land, and also in shipping and aviation, the cleaner fuel switch is a first priority. And also we need infrastructure for active mobility and shared public transportation, and use over more of private vehicles, and for trains over air travel for short distances. But what I want to say is that only one sectoral effect is not going to deliver what we need. So we need all the actions to happen at the same time. So we need clean energy sector, we need zero carbon transport sector, we need all human settlements in this decade should consist of zero emission buildings and infrastructure. So we need to see how each country is far away from these, and then we need to build those gaps. And existing building stocks also need to decarbonize by at least 3% annually starting now. So energy intensive industries like cement, iron, and steel must commit to carbon neutrality through technological innovations such as electrification, green hydrogen, and carbon removal. And above all these mitigation action, what is also needed is to enhance the capacity of natural carbon sink. And in this decade, forests and agriculture must be converted from a net source of greenhouse gases to net sinks. We often do not talk of demand side story, but interestingly, stress on supply side can be easier if on the demand side, all appliance uses are efficient, service delivery systems are material and energy efficient, and product lifetime is increased, and wastes in food and resource use are minimized. Our studies show that in the long run, 40 to 80% of reduction in emission can come only from demand side intervention. However, this requires infrastructure policy and public engagement. So question is, what I want to highlight more is that question is not about just, speed of transition, because it has to happen in this decade. We all know that. We also know that the scale of transition is that it has to happen everywhere. But it is now about how justice and equity can be ensured while making this transition. And we already are living in a 1 degree warmer world, and we are seeing impacts are not fair, right? Impacts are most on those who emitted the least. So when supply side transition happens, or the demand side transition happens, how fair transition can happen should be our, simultaneous priority in our actions. I'll give 2 examples, right? From Bangladesh, when we did a recent study, we saw that what Bangladesh has achieved today and what it aspires to achieve in this next 2 decades to become a developed country, it's the natural gas extraction and the infrastructure around that and the skilled manpower around that has made it where it stands today. So if the fossil fuel has to be stopped, then we need an alternative fuel which can fuel its fast growing phase of the economy. And our studies show that it's the geothermal and the hydrogen can be promoted for using the existing gas infrastructure so that there is justice in transition in the sense that job losses and the stranded asset problem do not create a problem within the economy. However, our studies also show that these two are not in the discussion agenda of this country at all. And this example is true for many countries in the South and Southeast Asia. I'll also give another example that in India, we are doing a study where we are trying to see that how 100% renewable energy based supply system based on solar and wind, is it possible? Because in Bangladesh, everything cannot happen through solar and wind, given its different geographical constraints. But in India, given the big country, we need long distance transmission line planning, we need storage, given that there is a solar wind complementarity in the resources. But unless transition is planned from now, regional equity will be a big problem in the long run. So what I feel is that for intergenerational justice in transition, which is absolutely needed so that the future development is also not hampered. But what is needed is that we need to start all the actions from today. And the countries do not have enough capacity because there is need for this capacity in a huge extent so that all areas can be planned and streamlined for action towards net zero by the mid-century. Nature-based solutions we talk about, which simply means that the forests and coastal ecosystem can be big sinks, but that would mean a lot of shift in land use pattern in the forests and the coastal region, or a larger land needs to be reforested and restoration of forest will be needed. But in this regard also, we have seen that in many of the cases, the gender perspective, which is so important because with the forest economy and the coastal economy, the women's participation, marginal communities' participation are so high, but these are completely ignored in any of the NDCs. None of the NDCs talk about the justice in transition. We did a study in different countries very recently, and we were trying to understand how policymakers or those who are in implementing agencies, how far they understand about just transition. But to our surprise, we found that, maybe 80% do not understand what justice in transition or what just transition mean. They thought that, oh, it may be just just a transition, right? So a mere transition, but it's not justice in transition is not understood. So how stranded asset problem can be resolved in these countries and what capacity is needed for managing that is solely ignored in all the NDCs. And we have seen that the women's perspective, women's agency is also still missing because let me just give one example. In HIMAP report of Himalaya Hindu Kush report, what we found is that still 70% of the rural women are engaged in energy source provisioning, right? Biomass collection, etc., etc. So now the question is, if we are going for more and more electrification in next 10 years, how are we empowering these women to get into that jump in the power in the energy use? How they will still be empowered because they are in energy business right now? How they are going to lose their energy businesses, or how we empower them to keep them in the energy businesses? There is need for training, there is need for integrating them, and need for participation of the women in the whole process. Otherwise, what we are seeing, because already we are living in a 1 degree warmer world, and we are seeing that how unfair this is in terms of impacts. So in mitigation also, when we speed up the mitigation, how we are leaving behind the women or the marginalized group will be very important, because in climate smart agriculture, we have also seen that the women are actually in the losing end right now. In many case studies, we have seen that. We have published those. So what it simply means is that when we are talking about revision of NDCs in 2 phases, in the coming 2 phases, unless we integrate these marginalized groups who are the worst impacted and who will be victims of speed in mitigation action also needs to be brought into the whole picture. Otherwise, there will be no social acceptance. And without social acceptance, we cannot speed up action on the ground. And all our studies show that even if we know that what needs to be done for a country, we have not enough trained manpower to implement those. So as we build on the knowledge of what is to be done, we need to build also the capacity for implementation, and justice in transition should be the high priority. And in all next NDCs, it should show up in the NDCs. That will be my advocacy and also request to all the groups that we should look into the marginalized group and the justice in transition. I'll stop here and we'll take any questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Professor Roy. So far, we have heard about the initiatives that the UNFCCC has to support the alignment of the NDCs. We have here examples from GGI on aligning the NDC and LEDS, and we have here how to ensure a just transition and how we are missing the woman's perspective in this planned transition. So now we are moving on to more specific examples on the alignment of LEDS and NDCs in Asian countries. So I will give the floor now to our next speaker, which is Ms. Vichet Ratha. She is the NDC Partnership in Country Facilitator from Cambodia. She works at the Ministry of Environment in Cambodia. She has over 16 years of experience in the education sector, and she has coordinated the development of the Cambodia UNFCCC National Communication Report and has been deeply involved in the preparation of Cambodia's NDCs. So, Ms. Vichet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dinah, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So it is my great pleasure to join you this virtual Asia-led Partnership Forum on linking long-term strategy to recent submitted NDC. I would apologize as I do not have the presentation. So let me speak related to how Cambodia link our long-term strategy to the NDC. So as you know, that Cambodia has always been a strong supporter of the international action on climate change. And as a country particularly vulnerable to the impacts of the climate change, we understand the agency of the ambitious climate action and the long-term target. And in accordance with the Article 4, paragraph 19 of the Paris Agreement, all countries are requested to formulate and communicate the long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategy with mindful of the Article 2, taking into account their common but differentiated responsibility and respective capability. In the light of the different national circumstances, Cambodia aims to lead by example in line with our capacities and responsibility under the UNFCCC. The Royal Government of Cambodia has, as a non-annexed party to the UNFCCC, in cooperation with the international community, it is committed to address climate change issues and is promoting the building of climate resilient, low carbon, sustainable development society. Cambodia ratified the UNFCCC in 1995 and access to Kyoto Protocol in 2002, and also other relevant agreements such as the Paris Agreement in 2015. And under the Paris Agreement, we know that the global community has agreed to limit the global warming to well below 2 and preferable to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And following the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015 with other countries, Cambodian outlines our commitment and take action to reduce the greenhouse gas emission and adaptation through our communication of domestic mitigation and adaptation strategy, and also seeking the most efficient climate solution that advance multiple sustainable development goals at once. So Cambodia submit the first national determined contribution in September 2015, and also the update NDC in December 2020. And our Cambodian development is focused on poverty reduction and stable economic growth as part of drive to become an upper middle income nation by 2030 and developed country by 2050, as this enshrined in our national strategic development plan. As mentioned, Cambodia is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, which is characterized by frequent flooding, irregular rainfall, agrarian-based economy, limited human and financial resource, as well as insufficient physical infrastructure and limited access to technology. At the same time, Cambodia total greenhouse gas emission is also increased as the country develops. So Cambodia recently submit update NDC, set the target for climate change action until 2030. And the update NDC aim to reduce about 42% of emission compared to business as usual scenario. And our Prime Minister Somdech Techo Hun Sen announced at the 2020 Climate Change Ambition Summit that the country intention is to develop a long-term low emission development strategies. LEDS will ensure the coherence of short-term climate action, NDC, with a long-term climate goal that are vital since current NDCs are only enough to limit the global warming to 2.7 to 3.7 degrees Celsius, as mentioned by the UNFCCC in 2020. So LEDS is a policy tool that provide an overall framework for the national policy discussion, and it helps Cambodia place NDC action in the context of long-term changes required and integrate low emission, climate resilient, and green growth in one plan. It is important that the strategy is developed on the other national development objective, and it can also help in terms of the coordination between the strategies. The country sees that the LEDS promote and enhance an inclusive and green post-COVID recovery and access of financing. It's also continue the effort to have Cambodia raise climate ambition initiated by the update NDC with target up to 2030. And the process to develop LEDS for Cambodia require engagement of the key ministries, subnational government, private sector actors, NGOs, and civil society organizations in order to share, to strengthen and build a shared vision for long period of time that was created during the NDC update process. The key ministries involved through involvement through the member of the Climate Change Technical Working Group, which bring together 19 ministries and agencies. One of the key functions of the CCTWGs is to participate in resource mobilization for an effective response to climate change through regular policy dialogue and coordination with donor, private sector, and civil society organizations. In addition, the process will also require strengthening and reconsideration of the existing institutional arrangement and the enhanced transparency framework under development for the NDC implementation and analyzing of the financial option and socio-economic impacts of the priority action selected for the long-term development. And Cambodia sees that it is very important to streamline its climate action, and the LEDS process has followed the NDC update process in the scope and approach used. The LEDS process has adopted the template that were developed for the NDC update process, and the scalability of the NDC action up to 2050 or 2060 has been analyzed during the process. And the enhanced transparency framework currently in progress for the NDC implementation will later include in the LEDS target that will be tracked with the online-based climate action tracker development. We think that it is the time for ambition, NDC, and long-term strategy for carbon neutrality and the develop transparent implementation plan for climate action at the country, region, and international level. This work could be begin for climate action at a scale and speed that we need for the well-being of our people. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Ms. Vichet. So we are following with the next and last speaker. He will be also providing a specific example of a country. She is Ms. Anggi Pertiwi. She works as a planner at the Directorate of Environmental Affairs from the Ministry of National Development Planning from Indonesia. She is an environmental engineer and she has experience in the sectors of oil and gas, construction, etc. So the floor is yours, Ms. Anggi.
Thank you, Ms. Diana, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Greetings from Jakarta, Indonesia. I hope you're all safe and sound during this pandemic. And also greetings to the other honorable speakers sharing their experience regarding this long-term strategy and the low carbon development. Please allow me to share Indonesia's experience regarding the Indonesia long-term or low emission development strategies. I'm very aware that we're also lacking of time, so I think I'm gonna go fast through some slides because I put like 10 slides here. Can you go to the next one? Yeah. So of course, I think that everybody is aware that the IPCC has launched its latest report, and it warns us about the code red of humanity. We are now struggling the COVID-19, but also the climate crisis is the bigger problem that we also need to tackle together. And it's still a homework for most of the countries in the world and also in Indonesia. Next. Yeah, so basically COVID-19 hits Indonesian hard, not only more in the economic and health perspective, but then again, our president has also aimed for Indonesia to transform for a more sustainable recovery. And we are designing it right now under the Ministry of National Planning and Development. And like on August 16 on Indonesian Independence Day, President Jokowi has declared his country to transform moreover towards the renewable energy and also how to accelerate our economic development based on the green technology. Next. Yeah, so basically when we talk about what is a recovery from the COVID-19. We have the recovery development or recovery plan, but we are also preparing our economic transformation. In 2045, Indonesia have set some target to get out or avoid into the middle income trap, but then the COVID strikes, so it might jeopardize our target. So we are now preparing and more studying on how we can like transform our economic in the long-term strategy that also have the green economic as a backbone. So basically this economic transformation strategy plans have like 6 other strategy, including competitiveness of human resource, and then productivity in the economy sector, digital transformation, domestic economy integration, and also you might also know about the capital city relocation that we are also planning. But moreover, we have this green economy aspect that we also consider as one part of our transformation. And one of the strategy for this economic transformation is through the green economy and the low carbon development. So hopefully this transformation can also promote for better economic growth and improve our social welfare while maintaining the environmental quality. Next. So basically, after this slide, I will show you some of the simulation that Indonesia has made for exercising our net zero emission scenario for low carbon development. We use a system dynamic approach and also spatial dynamic, because spatial is also an important thing in country like Indonesia that have 17,000 islands. So in the low carbon development policy scenario, we have like 4 major strategy from the energy sector, land, waste, and also the most important enabling condition is also fiscal. So from the energy sector, let's say that we must to transform to a net zero emission by 2060, we have to not only focus on the renewable energy side, but also in the energy efficiency side to gradually increase the number of energy efficiency until 1% until 6%. And also to to have the low carbon scenario, we also need to transform to 100% renewable energy in 2060. And from the transport sector, that is also a part of our energy sector, we also need to transform or have a transition to more electric vehicle of 95% in the total of vehicles in use. And then for the land sector, I think this is also plays a huge role in our long-term strategy. This is also include the increasing of reforestation efforts until 250,000 hectares per year, and also we will increase the number of peat restoration and also mangrove rehabilitation, because Indonesia have also a lot of mangrove, and then also preventing the deforestation from forest to agricultural land. And then the other priority sector that we also emphasize in our low carbon development policy scenario is about the resource efficiency or the circular economy. And when we talk about waste, simply it's not only when we talk about circular economy, it's not simply just about waste management. We talk circular economy more holistically, more on the resource efficiency side. So we want to increase not only the recycling rate of domestic waste, but also about how the industry or the private sector can also reduce the production of wastewater in 2060. And lastly, but not least, the enabling condition is about the fiscal aspect that plays a huge role. Like we are planning also to, to abolish our fossil fuel subsidies by 2030. And might be that some of you have known that Indonesia is also developing its regulation on carbon pricing, and hopefully carbon tax policy can be taken place to help us achieve the net zero emission target in the future. Next, in this slide, so we, like I mentioned before, we use the system dynamic approach, and then we exercise how the green economy will give impacts in our economic growth and also in our emission target. In this graphic, you can see that compared with the business as usual, the net zero emissions scenario shows a higher economic growth rate due to higher of TFP or total factor productivity in this scenario. So one thing that I also want to emphasize is we make this exercise of the economic growth with the green economy and low carbon development. And Indonesia is also trying to implement the Article 3.4 in the UNFCCC to integrate this exercise of the long-term strategy in our midterm development, and hopefully in our long-term development that is also still ongoing progress. The long-term development plan will be held in 2025 until 2045. So hopefully this exercise can be integrated in our long-term development plan. Next. On the projection of national greenhouse gas emission, it can be seen in the table, the emission projection of all sectors of the LCDI. So the three main sector I've mentioned before, that we focus on energy and transportation, and also the land-based that includes forestry and agriculture and blue carbon, but there's also the waste and industry. So we try to project the emission from those six sector, and the above mentioned sector is also incorporated in our national midterm 2020 until 2024. So it can be seen also in the graphic that under the business as usual scenario, the energy sector is projected to contribute to more than 70% in the greenhouse gas emission, while with the net zero emission scenario projected the energy sector, the greenhouse gas emission can be continuously declining to almost zero in 2060. Next. So when talking about low carbon development indicator, besides the emission reduction, we also put the national greenhouse gas emission intensity as one of the indicator. And it can also be seen that emission intensity is also an important indicator to monitor Indonesia's trajectory in the process of transforming of green economy itself, because the implementation of NZE scenario will lead to a more progressive reduction in emission intensity compared to the business as usual scenario. And it will result moreover to a much greener economy. And we are really hoping that transforming the green economy, Indonesia will have an economic structure that is more resilient to shocks like COVID and other shocks like climate crisis, and can actively participate in global trade that begins to pay attention to environmental sustainability issues also. Next. Yeah, this is, like I mentioned in the 2 slides before, that energy plays a very huge role when talk about long-term strategy in Indonesian case. And of course, one of the consequences of encouraging the transition is there'll be a large investment needs for the energy transition. And however, knowing the investment needs will continue to increase, the government also needs to immediately prepare a funding mobilization strategy to be able to realize, to implement the energy transition. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, we have like calculate that the amount of investment needed is around 70,000 trillion rupiah, which is 5 times our GDP. It's a very large number. And regarding this investment, I think the previous speaker also says about the just transition. It's also an important part, because there will be so many stranded assets when we shift to a more greener infrastructure or technology. And how we manage the just transition is also an important part itself. And like last year, we also calculate that the business as usual or the low carbon investment budget that is allocated, and there's still a gap. So we are still like analyzing other potential funding that can be take place to also allocate the gap itself. Because if we rely on the government budget, I think that we won't achieve the target. So we really need to mobilize funding and alternative funding, alternative scheme to help us achieve the target. Next. Yeah. As a way forward, we Indonesia realize that the long-term strategy is a part of the economic transformation, but also to help Indonesia to be more resilient after this pandemic. So as a closing statement, we believe that the economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic must be a momentum for Indonesia to transform towards a more sustainable economy as part of the implementation of green and low carbon economy. And we do realize that there are still gaps between the needs and the availability of funding. A comprehensive enabling condition is also needed to support the mobilization of government and private funding, especially on the energy sector. And then the last one, when talking about the long-term strategy, it is also necessary to design a technology transfer mechanism that can be applied in Indonesia to increase productivity while also encouraging sustainable production process. Thank you. I think that's it from my side. Looking forward for the discussion, Ms. Diana.
Thank you, Ms. Sangi. So we still have a couple of minutes to go through some of the questions that have not been answered online. So the first question that we have is, how should investors and financing institutions can encourage or support the alignment that we seek between LEDS, NDCs, and national development plans? I don't know if Ms. Angie, you can provide the overview from the Indonesian example.
Pardon, Diana, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So they are asking, how can financing institutions or investors can support the alignment between NDCs and LEDS long-term strategies?
Okay. So I think the financial institution will play a huge role when talking about the enabling condition and to make a better or enabling ecosystem for the green technology and green investment to be implemented. So I think the financial sector can produce the policy and drive the policy more on the greener way. And of course, we do realize that there's becoming a trend about greenwashing. So I think it is also needed to have a robust indicator of what is called green when we talk about investment and technology, to make sure that it is really we support or we develop the project that is really impact to the emission and the environmental aspect.
Thank you. Ms. Vichet, do you have any insights from the Cambodian example and implementation of LTS and NDCs? Okay, so otherwise we will jump into the next question. So the next question is, how can we better align science, policy, and practice towards a common vision for a net zero carbon or net zero emissions in the future? I don't know if Professor Roy, do you have any comments on that question?
Yes, definitely. You know, I think what is really needed now is that there is need for cooperation among the different stakeholders, so that policymaker and the scientists need to come together so that they can co-design the policies, because co-designing is becoming important. Say, for example, when the question comes that whether 100% renewable in the longer run based on solar and wind are possible or not, right? So this may be a question for the policymaker, but then it's the scientists who have to come up with the knowledge that how this will be possible. And then they can involve the businesses, they can involve the financial institutions and other stakeholders to do that. So I think first we need really the science which says that how this is possible, and then this can be implemented, and then the barriers can be looked into.
Thank you, Professor Roy. And finally, I would ask the panelists to give a very fast key takeaway message to be considered by the countries in aligning LTS and NDCs. Perhaps we can start with Dr. Grafakos.
Thank you, Diana. I think key messages with regard to alignment of LEDs and NDCs would be to make sure that we exploit the potential synergies of aligning these processes with regard to efficiency, with regard to enhancement of ownership, with regard to higher chances of implementation of climate actions. I think another key message is the importance of engagement with different stakeholders and multiple ministries, again, to enhance ownership and align these processes that shouldn't be isolated. So higher engagement and exploitation of synergies in both in institutional terms, but also in practical terms, as I mentioned before, using analytical tools, baselines, scenarios, so on and so forth, just to name a few.
Thank you. Mr. Jens, any key takeaways for the countries to consider?
Yes, but I'm sorry, my camera is failing, so I'm sorry I can't open my camera. No, I'd say really one of the really important takeaways or the important things to keep in mind is if we look at the NDCs that have been submitted, the updated and new NDCs, there is definitely some improvement. We see stronger targets. We see some movements by a number of countries. The only problem that we see is that very few of these NDCs are actually aligned to long-term emission reduction strategies and targets. So while we're making small progresses, it's simply not enough. So it's really important to now look into how, take these mid-century emission reduction targets as serious, and then really design the roadmap as kind of a number of consecutive NDCs towards mid of the century. It really doesn't help to look at one NDC after the other without having the full trajectory in mind. So I'd say really looking at like, how do we get there, not thinking NDC by NDC, but really looking into what are the main transformative actions, not the small steps that we can take one by one, but where along the road from now to mid-century can we have these major breakthroughs that bring the emission down to the levels that we need. So I think having this in mind and then really start planning, and very few countries have actually submitted these long-term strategies. And I think on the other hand, a lot of countries have started thinking about it. If you take this serious and then make sure to have this in mind for future NDCs, then we'll hopefully have some faster progress and some breakthroughs. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Angie, any critical messages to be considered for the countries in aligning LTS and NDCs?
So also, I also want to raise about the collaboration and communication that Jens raised, because I think it's also a key factor on integrating it all. It's not like only a document, but how we integrated it in our national development plan and other plan that is ongoing in the country context. And second of all, we also want to emphasize the evidence-based policies. So make sure that the strategy, the policy is exercised well and discussed not only among the government, but also the experts that can enhance the long-term strategy and policy scenario. Yeah, that's it from my side, Diana. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Roy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, NDCs need to include the justice and transition issue and the women's role and participation in new emerging opportunities in energy transition and women empowerment specifically to enhance social acceptance. And national capacity assessment in implementation is a major gap in any LT-led strategy.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Bichette Rata, any thoughts on key takes away for countries on how to align LTS and NDCs?
Thank you. I think that it is very important to align our NDC and long-term strategy with our national policy and development plans. And also it is in line with our capacities and responsibility under the UNFCCC. And another one is involvement of the key stakeholder for being able to build a strong shared vision for a longer period of time is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bichette. So now, in the interest of time, I will pass on the word to the organizers for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for moderating this session. We are well within the time limit. So it's been a pleasure to listen to all the speakers today. Some of the speakers have in fact shared some very valuable resources in the chat box. So I do encourage the participants to please go through these resource materials. I would also like to highlight the fact that the Asia LEDS partnership exists because of our members. And by that, I mean that we have policymakers, we have government officials, we have NGOs and experts, sector experts as part of this membership. And we are all striving towards supporting countries in helping them to design and implement their NDCs and their long-term strategies. And as part of the ALP, we do it in the manner of showcasing best practices, helping countries with some technical assistance that they might require, or supporting in some capacity building platforms. So I would do encourage everybody if you do have any specific requests, to have any case study, best practices from your countries that will help other countries or other stakeholders in developing their long emission long strategy documents or their NDCs and raising their ambitions. We encourage you to please let us know about it, and we can connect with you later on beyond the forum as well. So I would like to now conclude the session, but before we do, I would request all the panelists to please turn on their videos so we can take a quick photograph together. Unfortunately, in the time of virtual sessions, this is the only way for us, but yes, thank you so much. I would just ask one of my colleagues to please take a picture. So I'll just say 1, 2, 3, smile everybody. Thank you. Yeah, I think my colleagues have captured it. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. So we do have a feedback form, and I would request all the participants to please fill this up and give your feedback. I thank all the participants and the speakers especially for a very insightful session, and we look forward to having you join us for the rest of the sessions at the ALP forum. The next will be on the 2nd of September, that is day after tomorrow on Thursday, and we will be focusing on the transport sector in this session, looking at how the COVID pandemic has impacted transportation, as well as looking at electric mobility and its potential in mass transit systems. So we look forward to you in these 2 sessions as well. Thank you so much, and have a good day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Good day.
Thank you. Bye.